Hello, everyone. I am Muskan. I'm a part of the growth team here at Vymo. To get started, I'm just going to give you a little bit of brief about Vymo, and for all of you who don't know us already, Vymo operates in the sales enablement acceleration space where we help financial enterprises across the globe improve their sales processes, their partner relations, and engagements. We've worked very closely with over 60 plus leading enterprises such as AIA, AXA, FE Credit in Vietnam, and Berkshire Hathaway in the US. Moving along to give you a little bit of context on today's discussion, we know that the banking industry has lived in its comfortable bubble for decades until the pandemic hit and forced them to embrace the new normal. This change opened up a lot of new avenues for the industry to push and to better its presence in the digital space, right? They put their steps in. So banks have accelerated productivity and taken so many steps to retain customer loyalty by equipping their sales teams, their front-end teams with data insights and technological capabilities across multiple touchpoints and multiple channels. And to cover all of these topics and how it has affected the Thailand banking industry right now, we have Varun Ravichandran. Varun is our VP Product Marketing and GTM. He focuses on creating tailored sales productivity solutions for key industries and geographies around the globe. Along with Varun, we have Gordon. Gordon is our senior inside sales rep. And previously, Gordon had taken up a position as an intermediary between project owners with EPC projects and related stakeholders in various industries, such as renewable energy, property development, and construction projects. Just before we start the webinar, I want to let everyone know that if you have any questions at all, you can put it up in the Q&A section and Varun and Gordon will take up the questions live. And in the case you cannot hear the speakers well enough or cannot see the presentation at any point, you can put it in the chat and I'll fix all the technical issues. All right, I'll let Gordon and Varun start the fireside chat now. Varun, you can take over.
Hey, thank you so much, Muskan, for that introduction. We are having some trouble with the video. So once we sort it, we'll turn on the camera for the people listening in. But we'll start the conversation as well. Hi, Gordon. Thanks for joining us in this chat today.
Hi, Varun.
Hi. So like Muskan said, a lot of things we are seeing in the banking industry across the globe transforming, and in particular, a lot of these transformations have been spurred in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. What we thought we can do today, Gordon, is that, and we get a sort of ringside view into a lot of these transformations by working with some of the leading banks and non-bank financial institutions globally. And as somebody who has been building industry solutions for multiple geographies in the globe, I have a point of view on various stages at which these markets are in terms of their sort of maturity, in terms of digital transformation and so on. And we're seeing a lot of things that are emerging as common trends and challenges at various stages of this digital evolution. So I thought it would be good to take here your own insights into the Thailand market itself, and we discuss how some of these trends are playing out in Thailand. And so that context, I'd love you to take over what we can start talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Varun, for the opening and intro, and Muskan as well for the brief introduction of our Vymo. So allow me to share the slide.
I apologize, everyone. My internet just got dropped for a second. I'm back now. Is my voice audible now, Gordon?
Yes.
Yeah.
However, I cannot share. It's being disabled by the host, so I need to reshare the screen again.
Okay. Can
Muskan,
one
are you
of
the host right now?
Mushkan, Madhuri, can one of you help us with this? We're not able to share the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows that the
Hey,
host
hey,
disabled
I'm
participant.
the host. I've enabled the screen sharing option. Can you change it? Can you check now?
Yes. All right. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can, Gordon.
Okay, great. So do allow me to continue to the next page.
Gordon, I think your voice is a little bit too low. Can you fix up your mic? So sorry for the technical issue, guys.
Yeah, right. Is it better now?
Yes.
Right. So with more than 80% of Thai consumers owning a bank account, Thailand, well, has been one of the Southeast Asia most developed banking markets. And then Thailand also have some of the best digital economy development prospect in Southeast Asia alone. Its relatively high per capita income has led to high mobile phone penetration. And it brings also the digital life to the vast majority of its citizens. As you can see here, just Thailand alone, they have more than 6,000 branches. And we should touch on this in the upcoming slides as well. And then Varun, from your perspective on the global trend as well as from America and APAC, what do you think Thailand lies when in comparison for both regions?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is, I mean, it's a very interesting slide to start with. And I think what we are seeing is that Thailand in general seems to have a strong foundation compared to a lot of the other countries in Southeast Asia and in the broader emerging world. Thailand seems to have taken a lead in a lot of initiatives. It is well connected. So as we can see here, a large number of the mobile banking accounts and so on. So it is one of those economies which is well placed to make the transition to where the advanced world is. We work, of course, at Vymo, we work with sort of lenders in the developed world and also in large economies in Asia, like India, and we find that most of the emerging world is in this transition phase, moving toward digitization, which we'll talk about next. And the ways in which they are playing out are actually quite interesting. I mean, from my perspective, based on the conversations I've had in Thailand, based on what I'm seeing on this slide, I think Thailand is placed well to make that transition. I think the time is now. We were reading some of the reports which were put out by sort of leading institutions like the Bank of Thailand, for example, where the intent in terms of making these fundamental shifts are very clear. So I think the foundation being strong is the first step, which we are seeing that in some countries is not the case, but in Thailand we do they do seem to have the case. I mean, it does seem to be the case that they are ready to make that shift. And I think we'll talk about some of these details later. But based on your experience, Gordon, I mean, so do you think that the sort of awareness of how some of these journeys in terms of the bank um, and the customer relationships, the purchasing journeys, the products on offer, and so on, are you seeing a shift happening and the importance of this shift being felt in Thailand?
Yes, definitely, Varun. Having been in Thailand for the past 6 years, I've seen quite a bit of change, especially in the retail banking side. E-payment gateways as well, and how the ease of payment is being made and elevated in Thailand as a whole. Of course, there are some other wholesale banking and stuff like that in my previous experience as an entrepreneur here in Thailand when I set up my business and to set up a business account. But we'll come to that later in the slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's move on to the next.
Yeah. So, but as we look at the breakdown in the various segments of the product and services that Thai banks have to offer, would it be comparable with other regions in the US or India?
Yes, I think this is comparable. I think this is broadly comparable. I don't. I think it. I mean, it is in line. I think. I mean, what we are seeing is that across the board, in some segments, we are seeing transformation happening a lot more. And I believe that we'll start to see the same sorts of shifts happening in Thailand as well. So, for example, in CASA branch banking, in retail banking, SME banking, we will start to see a lot more sort of multi-channel, omni-channel sort of purchasing experiences. You will see a lot more targeted products being offered by sort of newcomers in the market and so on. Whereas with, say, on the corporate banking or the institutional banking and so on, it will be probably what our sort of experience has been is that the institutional and the corporate side of the business takes a little longer to move. But because the push is coming from the customers who are voting with their mobile phones, who are voting with their preferred sort of modes in which they like to search for options, they are putting competitive pressure on the incumbent sort of traditional lenders. We are seeing a lot more transformation happening on the retail and personal banking side. And I would like to. So, do you think that's the fair assessment of how things are going in Thailand as well? I mean, would you say that you might see more rapid transformation in, for example, retail lending as compared to, say, institutional lending or corporate banking?
Yeah, a few reports over the past couple of years has actually stated that Thailand has one of the highest debt to ratio to income ratio here in Southeast Asia, or at least in this region, right? So this has actually prompted a whole new host of problem for the government in charge, at least the financial in the Ministry of Finance side. But back to the banking sector again, this is also another opportunity, but they have their compliances and risks for that matter, right? So, but I can see there are certain areas that probably is outstanding, like in terms of, say, corporate banking when compared to other regions, like from Singapore and where I'm from. And then, of course, Thailand is also the second largest economy in Southeast Asia. So that also have, in fact, helped with the rapid development as a whole, when compared to Indonesia being the first, the largest economy in Southeast Asia. So based on this perspective, like the BOT has a certain new criteria that lay in place. I believe it was published earlier this year in February. We will touch on that on the later coming slide as well, on some of their new policies for banking, especially where fintechs are concerned.
Right, makes sense. Yeah.
So you can see from this slide that by 2025, in just a couple of years, the top 10 banks in Thailand will actually reduce their branch network by 15%. That is quite a bit of branches that will be under reduction. So, Varun, what do you think about this move, and how do you think banks will help the transition and the redeployment of their current employees from a Western point of view?
Yeah, so I think this is a shift that I think Thailand is sort of boldly projecting, and I think they are going in the right direction. So we have seen this shift already happen, say, in the North American markets, in Europe, and so on, where the branch itself and what is meant by a branch is going to change. It's going to move beyond the boundaries of just a physical branch on a location. And so just turned on my video, everyone. And it's going to start to sort of bring together multiple channels, multiple modes. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on the conversation as well, right? So what will a branch and what will the interaction with a branch actually look like in this digital mode? But I think the sort of direction in Indonesia is clear. The number of physical branches are going to fall. I think I also read some reports, and we spoke to some people who said that the number of employees in banks across lines of businesses are going to fall, etc. At the same time, the market opportunity is rising, and they need to sort of respond to more targeted needs of the large customer base who is very demanding, who are on these mobile channels. So I think, it's an acknowledgement that very heavily physical branch and field force led model might not be the way forward. And what can we do to proactively make the transition in a smoother way? Right? So I think we have some ideas on that, which we will discuss. But what this also means, and not just in the banking space, but some of the fundamental ways in which people find out about their options in terms of financing, but also in terms of insurance products and various other things will change. And I think this shift that we're seeing in the reduction of the branch network will have ripple effects not just on, say, lending and how that is going to be done, but also on insurance. I mean, which is outside of the purview of this discussion, but the banca sort of distribution model itself will have to have a different dynamic. So I think a lot of shifts will need to happen. And this is broadly in line with what's happening and what we're seeing happen in some of the other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, Varun, I totally agree with that, because there will be some correlation and some effects that will be spillover due to this movement and closures and things like that. And of course, the current employees can be redeployed, or in term, they can upgrade themselves to be suited with the fintech and then the digital banking platform and the path that they can choose.
Yeah. And I think one more point I want to mention here, Gordon, is that while the number of employees might go down, what we are seeing is across the board in Asia Pac for sure, banking still remains a function which is driven by sales users, by sales reps. And what is changing is the way in which the sales rep comes into the sales journey will be different. They will not be the by default option. So people might not by default go into a branch and talk to a salesperson, and then that might change. But you still have a salesperson who turns into more of a targeted advisor at various points. Some products are more applicable for having a salesperson-led approach. Some will be self-serve and purely digital. So I think it's not a question of sort of moving away from sales representatives. So it will be a question of a smaller number of sales reps, but like you mentioned, higher skilled sales reps, upskilled, and using the various digital tools that they have to add value in a smaller number of engagements at the right time. And that is where identifying those engagement points, making sure that the engagements are strong, will become very important.
Well, that's also another interesting point. May I bring your attention to the term phygital as well?
Yeah.
I believe this term phygital aspect will be interesting to most stakeholders, so we can explore that further down the line.
Yes, absolutely.
So as you can see here, how retail banking will be collaboration driven. So the pandemic, or at least we are still in the pandemic, right? So the pandemic has accelerated the adaptation of digital technology in the banking sector especially. So what are the challenges faced by employees when it comes to digital adoption? I mean, that's how we talk about some of the branches have been closed, but now we're talking about the infrastructure, the system, and the tools that they'll be enabled to drive this forward.
Yeah, and in fact, I think this is a good point, because in a lot of emerging economies right now, and a lot of the emerged world as well, so there's a lot of focus being put into open architecture, into open data, because they understand that because of the opening up of markets, a lot more specialization is possible. So for example, we have fintechs these days which focus on just one part of the overall lending life cycle, which might be on the video KYC or the eKYC. We have fintechs who are working on sort of analyzing the bank statements of employees, right? All of which goes into taking that credit decision. I mean, we have people serving in the prospecting space, people serving in the credit and underwriting space. So you have a lot of specialization happening, and the way that large sort of traditional lenders who offer the end-to-end sort of lending journey, the way in which they start to make the shift to digital and to try to become much more efficient in their process is by integrating with all of these players at various points. So it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel and go and build a KYC solution and say a data-driven risk modeling solution and a prospecting solution and so on, when those are problems already solved by these various fintechs. So collaboration will become a lot more important. So if I want to sell my products better and reach a larger amount of the customer base, offer them rates that are fair and competitive and so on, then I will need to collaborate with a lot of the ecosystem. So I think what is happening across the globe is that ecosystems are getting built. And these ecosystems are, at the end of the day, making sure that customers have better choice, that customers at the end of the day have better experience, or that the sort of lending process is smoother, say less amount of paperwork, less amount of back and forth, more fair sort of disbursements based on track record of a customer, because it's all open information that's being used and so on. And for sort of large banks and more traditional lenders, they are realizing that if they want to stay in the game and stay in the lead, then they have to collaborate with the ecosystem. So that is a shift that, to the credit of all the large banks and in Thailand as well, because we have seen the case. So we just spoke about the Bank of Thailand report, where they are leading the conversation in this. So the banks are not following and sort of trailing behind, but sort of they are acknowledging the need to collaborate with the ecosystem, and they're leading the charge. So I think that is going to lead to a lot of interesting propositions that will come to the market for customers in Thailand in the next few years. And what do you think, Gordon?
Well, Varun, the Thailand itself as a whole, quite a few years ago, the government actually declared to be in the stage, or at least to begin their 4G, the fourth generation industry applicable to the whole of Thailand, not only for banking sector, the government sector as well, and in all industries. However, for the past 6 years I've been here, just a personal observation. A lot of paperwork are still being employed, especially in the government sector. So as you mentioned, now the BOT, according to the report, they are trying to revamp this. They're trying to catch up with the latest technology know-how in order to be at least at the top of the game.
Right.
Do you think the government, the BOT has really tried to take a lead, but perhaps other departments, like other ministries, will also be, taking this approach as an example?
Yeah, I think it will happen. I think it will happen because I think at the end of the day, I think consumers are voting for this. Plus, governments are seeing some of these shifts happen in other parts of the world. I am based in India, and I can tell from experience here that a lot of what the governments have done over the last few governments, right, has paved the way for a lot of opening up of the market. Now we have a large section of this very large country, right, 1.3 billion people spread across a huge geography. Large sections of people now have a bank account and they have some access to financing. Large amount of the people have mobile phones and they have access to payment apps on that. I do know that in Thailand as well, mobile payments and all that are very common, right? And so the trend is there, and governments will do what they can from a regulatory standpoint to make it easier for these specialized fintechs to operate, for these open platforms where people can share data with each other, share services with each other. I think, it's bound to happen. And as banks sort of plan for what the next 5 years has to look like, they have to factor in that governments will make it easier for them to do so. I think it's a fair assumption.
Well, Varun, may I bring your attention to the second sentence there? With the retail banking poised to be a partner generated up from 2% to 10%, this is a 5-fold increase. So what are the opportunities that you can see in this sort of an increase?
Yeah, I think here, so there are multiple sort of partner channels that will start to get activated. And I think here, some very innovative options are available. I think in some sort of lesser banked areas, I know that sort of traditional lenders are working with multiple avenues to reach customers. So they might work with say a local sort of chain of retail stores, right, to make certain products available for people. They can work with some of the e-commerce platforms as well. I know that Amazon, for example, offers certain credit cards which you can procure off, say, Amazon itself. So I think the ways in which fundamentally, I think banks want to reach people where they live. right? Because they sort of realize that it is a competitive marketplace. More and more people are entering the space with a very focused solution for a focused market segment, and they're going to places where that market segment lives. So, for example, if a particular market segment is always on social media or on their mobile phones, etc., they are sort of creating products which are targeted for that segment, for that demographic of the population, and then going into those places and then selling those products, right? So for a large bank which operates across lines of businesses, so we saw 2 slides earlier about the various lines of businesses that a large bank would operate across. These new entrants might not seem like a big challenge because they are operating only in one small segment. But the fact is, a lot of these people are sort of emerging, and as more and more people like this, competitors, sort of come into play, what these large banks will find is that in a lot of the pockets that they are competing in, they have some new age digital entrant. And though each one of them might not pose an existential sort of question to the bank, all of these put together will be a major competition. And so banks will need to find ways of going to places where the customers are. And if their customers are on digital, say, platforms, if the customers are on e-commerce platforms, say, mobile commerce platforms, then banks need to partner with people who can take them there. And I think that is something that's happening in sort of multiple places around the globe. A lot of more creative options are being provided for financing. A lot of data is being used to make these creative options sustainable, because it's one thing to be creative, but you have to be creative and still sustainable as a business, and not at the risk of sort of lending out to people who might default. And here as well, a lot of partners are helping in providing insight into data points on a customer that might be beyond the conventional sort of definition of what is credit worthiness. And I do know that people are looking at social media, people looking at various things to sort of determine that. That evolution might still be further away in Thailand, is my sense. But for sure, from 2 to 10%, I think without a doubt, you will see that happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, nowadays consumers just want everything in an instant. They want all the information at the tip of their hands, and then everything has to be fast, accurate, and then all within the compliance framework as well, right? Which actually brings us to the next slide here. You see, based on the this study from our friends from Boston Consulting Group, we can see that 58% of customers achieve jump banks or shift banks due to unmet product needs. So, like I mentioned earlier, once the information or even just a slight percentage change or 0.5% change in terms of interest rates, for example, the consumer will just jump immediately, right?
Correct.
So,
correct.
Yeah, and then given the internet age, the age of internet in this case, comparison is pretty much fast, and then the banks will also find a challenge to deliver this information to their customers directly and in a more appropriate way in this case. So the next point, the 38% of customers do not trust their banks. This is also a very touchy issue for most people. Right? But what we can derive is probably information were not provided, and then their process were not clear or transparent in most ways. So this kind of processes will actually create a doubt in the customer mind. I mean, end of the day, is there money that the banks are handling, either from a loan perspective or from a depository perspective, right? And then last but not least, 30% of customers believe their bank's onboarding process is tedious. Earlier on, I mentioned the tons of paperwork to be completed and a lot of signature on each page, as well as the submitting of passports as well, ID, and of course, definitely there's a compliance to be made. And so these are the sort of challenge that retail banks currently have in Thailand, the amount of paperwork and how they can actually digitalize it in a way that is convenient not only to the banks but the customer themselves, and then the industry as a whole. We talk about retail banking, we talk about corporate banking as well. Just to share my experience, when I opened up a office here in Thailand, the amount of paperwork for me to set up a corporate account is actually very tedious. I had to visit the bank at least 3 times to get my account open. Just another viewpoint from the Singapore perspective, when I open up my bank account in Singapore, I should not name any banks now, yeah. So it was done within half a day, and all through, online, and then everything was e-meet and things like that, verification and stuff like that. So compliances are still in place. We will not skip any compliances steps and securities and stuff like that. So perhaps Thailand can also learn from this step, rather than the traditional way of submitting papers and being in person for the officers or the wealth managers to meet up to verify, and then to proceed their onboarding process in this case. And how about other regions? Are they on par with Singapore as well, or are they slightly a more effective way of handling this process?
Yeah, I think Singapore is at the cutting edge of this. What we find is that this sort of a statistic is applicable in most countries. I think Thailand might be having a particularly sort of trends in some of these things, which I'll get to in just a second. But broadly speaking, banks are having these worries across the globe. And even in the developed world, right, we're seeing traditional banks. I've spoken to some leaders there who seem to have the same problems. And if I look at each one of these statistics that I've put here, so like you mentioned, if somebody gets, say 0.5% of a better interest rate somewhere, so they are willing to shift, you have people, so it goes with my previous point about you have new incumbents coming into play in various parts of the world who are providing products that are very attractive because they are able to narrow down their target segment, and they are able to use more of a holistic, non-conventional, unconventional sort of data sources to identify credit worthiness, right? So they focus very sharply on one segment of the market. They understand that segment very well, so they are able to identify risk there, and they are able to give a better sort of proposition when it comes to retail loans, when it comes to credit cards, etc., to these customers. And so people are willing to shift for that. And I think customers these days are willing to shift. So banks cannot take it for granted that customers will sort of continue to remain with banks because of the large history and credibility which they bring into play. I mean, especially the younger generation of customers is more willing to move into new age providers. So that is a significant thing that banks need to be careful of. What you mentioned about the onboarding process is a problem. I think banks are realizing that, and so on. But the major thing that banks have as an advantage is that the deep pool of resources that they have, they can make a lot of these shifts. And if they do make these shifts, right, some of these shifts in being able to embrace these open architectures, being able to embrace these digital channels in smart ways, building partnerships in smart ways, I think the banks can very clearly retain their advantage because the advantages they have are extremely strong in terms of the credibility that they bring, in terms of the networks that they have, in terms of the customer pool that they already have, where sort of generation after generation has banked with them. And if they can make some of these smart shifts, they can continue to retain dominance. And which is where the central statistic is very important and a bit worrying, because the biggest thing that banks have is trust, right? I will not trust. I personally still bank with large banks, right? Because I trust and I know that they're not going to fold up anytime soon. So I am willing to put my money there and sort of willing to invest there. But if more and more people, especially the younger generation, say the Gen Z or whatever, if they are willing to say that, look, I am willing to split my, take a risk and then go to sort of some of these newer age providers, then banks will need to move soon. So I think a lot of these conversations are all coming to the same conclusion. I mean, which is that you don't have a choice. You do need to embrace this open technology and create a more smart option for customers. Otherwise, they will move away from you.
I see. Interesting. So let me just bring you to how modern banks will actually serve the customer anytime, any day. So, you mentioned earlier on credit cards, and I believe it's one of the most profitable channel and avenues that the bank will have. And also, we talk about technical issues or tech support or customer service. It will be frustrating, if a customer will require assistance in the middle of the night, and then but the lines are only open, say, in the morning, whereby they have some urgent banking issues to be done right in the middle of the night. Withdrawals and deposit services, things like transfer, money orders, and stuff like that. And then a signature for new fund initiation. We're looking at about e-signatures and compliances as well to be implemented, if any. Queries on wealth portfolio, we mentioned earlier on the wealth managers being stationed at the banks or their stipulated channels, and how wealth managers can respond to customers with their best practices and, of course, their approach. Yeah. So I mean, this is a very traditional kind of operation and a structure that a bank will have, especially when it comes to personal banking and similar. What are the areas that you think that Thailand, when compared to other regions, can actually improve in this area?
Yeah. So I think one learning from some of the more advanced markets like the USA, where we are working with some of the leading banks there, where we are making this transition as to what a modern branch or what a modern bank itself looks like. I think some of the things that you need to be sort of aware of as we look at this slide itself is that look at the touch points at which a customer is engaging with a banking service, right? You have a branch itself where a customer walks in. So customer might walk in and ask about their wealth portfolio, for example, or the customer might go to the website and browse certain credit cards, or the customer might make a call and then engage with the call center, or the customer is going to an ATM at say the local retail store and doing certain operations there. Or you also have the option where for certain wealth customers, you have the branch sort of sending a representative to the customer's home. So now the concept of a branch itself is all of this put together, right? And so the opportunities are huge. So just to just name one opportunity, right? Take the scenario where a customer is going to a website and browsing the credit card. While they browse the credit card, you send a notification to that customer's personal banking relationship manager saying that, hey, your customer was browsing this credit card, talk to them. And they pick up the phone, talk to them and say, hey, we heard that you were browsing, we learned that you were browsing cards, etc. This card might be better for you. So the chance that you will have a drop off will be much lower. And if they're browsing credit cards, they might be browsing other websites' credit cards as well. So the chance that you will catch them before they move to competition is also higher. So that's one small example. Second example, you have a customer who's walking into the branch, right, to do a normal, say, deposit or something like that, or they want to have some queries on their savings account, and they walk into a branch. When they walk into a branch, you have the local branch teller make a notification on their customer 360 on their standardized app saying that this customer has walked into the branch. That goes to the personal relationship manager who might be out on the field, but they have a mobile app which they use for banking and to track all of the customer 360. And on that, they get a nudge saying that your customer has walked into a branch and they have these certain queries. Now the relationship manager drops everything that they're doing and walks into the branch and has a conversation with the customer. And maybe when the customer is depositing money at the branch, on the screen on the laptop screen or on the desktop screen of the teller, you have a product recommendation show up, which says that based on the customer 360, here is a product recommendation. So the bank teller will start that conversation, and then by that time, the salesperson who was on the field has seen the notification, and he or she has come back to the branch, and they take the sales journey from there. So many interesting ways in which you can bring all of this together. It's not rocket science. It is just being able to, but the hard part is that all of these are currently disconnected. Your call center is happening in one place, your branch data, and who's walking into a branch is not going and talking to what is your website, and so on, right? And if all of this can be brought into a consolidated sort of customer 360 view, and then you have very simple, very targeted nudges at various points to make sure that people are following up So when something happens at one touch point, it has to trigger a set of actions at various other channels. If you can bring all of that together, it's a very powerful transformation. So we are seeing this happen in the Western markets. For example, we are working with banks there to make this transition happen. And I think Thailand market also has to start looking at that. Lot of potential here for very powerful transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Varun, sorry, can you hear me? Because I'm using my earpiece now.
I can, yes, I can.
Okay. So, I mean, exactly, what was being referenced earlier is actually brick and mortar type of establishment, which actually brings us to the next slide here. We can see what are the opportunities that there's in store when we move beyond the traditional boundaries. Digital age whereby services can be rendered 24/7, anytime, anywhere with the internet. Some of the challenges will be, what I see, should be security, compliances, and then of course the limitations of the IT infrastructure, if any. As mentioned earlier, the BOT or the Bank of Thailand has introduced a virtual banking license to stimulate competition amongst service providers. So what would you see will happen actually amongst the current banks now, and how will consumer react to that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we spoke about earlier is sort of what's going to happen. I think so. Firstly, I mean, in this sort of regard about brick and mortar branches, yes, I mean it is going to shift, and the definition of a branch is going to become anywhere that say customer can reach your services will become a branch, and the same. And by sort of linking all of these touch points together, the ways in which you can provide better customer experience is going to be significant. And I think all of those things are going to happen. One thing that is good about this phase of growth is that it's a solved problem, right? We can see what is happening. I mean, you mentioned Singapore. What's happening in Singapore? What's happening in Hong Kong? What's happening in some parts of Southeast Asia? What's happening in the US and in Europe and say North America? We can sort of look at that, and also what's happening in some innovative banking markets in the developed world like India. So this problem has been solved, and banks just need to have the ability to take some sort of tough calls in terms of investing, some tough calls in terms of partnering with the broader fintech space. Banks now are putting in place a chief digital officer whose mandate is to sort of have an in-house fintech incubation. I mean, we see that happening in India, for example, where leading banks have a chief technology and digital officer whose one of the mandates is to actually foster innovation in the fintech space by actually laying out grants, building sort of centers of excellence where they invite fintechs to come and build sort of solutions for them, which they say pick up the bill, right? And they say, I mean, we will give you a line of funding. Now you come and build for us, and then you can take that and go sell to other banks as well, right? But you innovate and build for us. And I think a lot of that. So the more there is acceptance of the fact that they do need to change, and they are willing to invest, I think the sort of actual details of what needs to happen has a lot of reference points in the rest of the globe world. And I think we spoke about some of that earlier as well. And you can just use that as playbook and sort of execute that in Thailand as well. And I mean, I just told you about how some banks in the US are doing this customer 360 with Vymo. And I think that same thing can be applicable in Thailand as well, just that maybe some sort of market specific nuances need to be built out. So a lot of this is not a new problem that we need to break our heads on. It can be solved. And I think the time now for the next 5 years is execution, not in trying to identify what needs to be done. I mean, we know what needs to be done. So let's do it now. Has to be the attitude. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of fintech and investment, the BOT, the Bank of Thailand, has actually lifted the limit on fintech investment, that excluding in the digital assets and by subsidiaries and affiliates in the banking group. And that is, it allows a more flexible structure of banking groups to encourage innovation while safeguarding the deposits and providing appropriate consumer protection in terms of compliance and related. So I think this is a very positive step from the BOT, allowing the flexibility in terms of fintech investment, whereby previously they were being constricted by a certain cap. So like what you mentioned, in the next 5 years, we should see a very good growth in terms of fintech industry and how the banks in Thailand can actually profit from that. Yep.
Yeah,
So let me
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
we mentioned earlier on the hybrid banking.
Hmm.
Yes, so it's actually through various marketing channels and funneling that, refining a meaningful digital message that undergoes quality leads management system in this case. In terms of automation, the digital message will then be forwarded to the intended sales rep, who then perform according to the playbook that they have actually created according to individual banks and their requirements. So this is actually just a very simplified process on how automation and digital technology can actually help with an individual. Varun, you are the expert in this.
yeah. So I think I mentioned an example earlier about how if you're walking into a branch, that can trigger a notification to your say relationship manager who might not be at the branch at that time, who can basically prompt the teller at the branch or the branch manager to sort of present a particular product which might be matching based on the track record and the existing products of a customer. And while the branch representative is presenting that, the sales rep comes back and closes the deal. So there are, and we see this happen. I think, what is required is a platform which can bring all of these channels together. Here is another example of the same thing, right? And here, so this starts with an outbound motion. So the previous example was where I walk into a branch and start inquiring, but here we can do a digital campaign. The campaign, we have solutions like Vymo, where you can do very targeted campaigns to sets of customers. We have sort of content refined. So we have content systems where you can have templates of content which can be and which can be attached to various subsegments of customers for your campaigns. As and when these responses come in on these campaigns, you can have follow-up recommendations sent out to a sales user who can then go and do a physical meeting and so on, right? And the physical meetings itself can be very scientific in the sense, in your first physical meeting, what is the content that you share? What are the follow-ups that you do? Because we can capture the feedback that came from the customer in that physical meeting that can go into the learning algorithm. And then based on that, the algorithm can determine what has to be your next follow-up. And the next follow-up might be a physical meeting, or it might be an auto, say, generated email with a product brochure and so on. So the workflow, the details are not so important as the whole concept that the workflow now is not just a sales rep who's allocated to credit cards is going and meeting a customer, calling again, and then close. So that is over, right? People are not picking up the phone. People don't want to do that. What they want is people are sort of being reached out via emails, via more targeted, campaigns can go even into social media and so on. And then once you have interest which has been generated, then you bring in the sales rep at the right time. And if required, you can do a physical meeting. If required, you can do a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting with the customer, showcase to them the options, and then do very smart and targeted follow-up, and then you close the opportunity. So multiple different sort of communication channels within one sales opportunity is going to become the norm. And we call that the hybrid banking world, but it is a reality in multiple parts of the world. It will become more and more the reality in Thailand as well, I'm pretty sure. Gordon, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
So this process will definitely help the sales rep. Being the sales line myself, all the sales rep will definitely require the background, the background help, and then all the digital and marketing assistance, therefore. So our next slide will actually showcase the magic data, or the data, what magic could the data actually in the right places. So with all the ML, the AIs in place, how could this actually help us, sales reps in the banking sector or even insurance sector per se? If we look at this very typical stack,
Varun, looking
Yeah,
at this?
yeah. So I think so this is a good place to end. I think we are sort of 5 minutes away, and this is a good place at which we can end, which is that we spoke about a lot of. So if I I'm sorry. So if I step back from the conversation and look at what are the elements of a solution that a bank needs to be able to help this new model of salesperson and this new model of sales. So we spoke about a few things. We spoke about the fact that the number of salespeople might become lesser, but salespeople will still be an integral part of retail lending and commercial lending and so on for the foreseeable future. So they will continue to play a part, but the part that they play will be more nuanced. So they will have to come in at the right time and have a more targeted and a more advisory role, right? So that is one thing we spoke about. We also spoke about the fact that branches are going to expand and shape shift into this sort of new beast, which will be across all channels, right? And what is a physical branch earlier will be now all over the place in the pockets of the customers. And what do they need to do? And what are the customer 360 that you need, and so on. All of these trends coming together. And we also spoke about the open architecture, the collaboration with partners, and so on. If these are the three major trends that are going to happen, then what is a solution that is required for banks, which can help them to help their salespeople to ride this tide across all of these three trends? And I think the way I can summarize it is that you need a solution which firstly provides a lot of productivity tools and a lot of upskilling tools and a lot of guided selling recommendation tools for the salesperson, because that will address the first trend. Because we spoke that salespeople need to be more smart in the way they interact with people. They need to be more personalized in their recommendations to customers. So any solution which can provide that to the customer, which can help sales reps identify which customers need their attention, on what channel they need their attention, with what content they need their attention, and how they can plan their day for maximum productivity, that will be powerful. So that will be the first pillar that a solution needs to solve. Second, we spoke about how a branch is going to become across multiple modes, and a powerful customer 360 is needed. So a powerful solution to solve for banks for the next 5 years will have a powerful unified window of a customer 360, which plugs in a physical branch, which plugs in your mobile sort of engine, which plugs in the sort of website and brings a sort of engagements that customers have across all of these into a single window, which can then be used to offer those journeys that we saw on the last slide, right? Hybrid journeys. So the second is customer 360. And the third is the ability to have integrations, or the ability to have a platform which is very easily extensible via API integration, so that you can partner well with the ecosystem. And at the risk of putting a plug for Vymo at this point, I will say that what we are building in the Vymo sort of industry solutions team for lending is exactly this. We are deployed with some of the largest sort of banks in the world. We are used by more than, at the 6th largest bank in the world, we're used by 125,000 salespeople, debt collection representatives, and so on, who use us across lines of business for all three things that we spoke about. So we are used as a very powerful front end for sales teams. So we upskill the salespeople. We are used as a very powerful customer 360 across wealth banking, branch banking, and so on. And we are also being used to plug in the broader fintech ecosystem to provide a very powerful end-to-end banking system. And that is where I think we are part of the digital transformation that a lot of banks are going through as we speak, right? And coming to this aspect, which you brought up, Gordon, which is data itself. Data is a word that is being used so much, but I think what is important is that can you use data which is available in third-party platforms in a right and in a targeted manner? And one example is this. This is an example of what we do in the US, for example, but it's relevant in Thailand as well. So, let us take a commercial banking scenario where you have third-party databases on company information, and we are watching that via integrations. So say, for example, Vymo recently raised Series C funding. And if I am a large bank which is sort of giving out business loans and so on, that is a relevant sort of trigger point for me to have a conversation with Vymo, right? Say via an integration with a database in the US, it is Zoom Info. We identify certain macro events or micro events like this in the market, and then we can create an automatic nudge which goes out to the salesperson saying that, hey, I think it's time to reactivate the conversation that you were having with this bank. And then we auto calendar the activity. So for them to go and have a conversation, right? And we can even generate an email for them to send out to their contacts at the bank saying, hey, congratulations on the CVC raise. I mean, I would love to talk to you in person about certain products which might be relevant as you make the next shift to growth. So these are ways in which it's not so much about just using data, plugging it in various places. That's not going to add value, but data used in the right place at the right time, it's very often very simple changes in workflows, but that can have transformational impact. So I think that's the takeaway. A lot of what I've said is fundamentally simple things done well. I mean, whether it's Customer 360, whether it's a sales productivity mobile app, and so on, it is simple things done well, which is what Vymo focuses on doing. But simple things done well, and in particular done in a choreographed manner where all the aspects fit together, is where banks need to go. And we would love to talk to any of our listeners here or people who are watching the recording afterwards. I would love to talk to you in person to showcase to you how we're doing some of these things for leading banks across the globe. So this is a solved problem. So let's try to replicate it in Thailand is what I would like to sort of end with. Gordon.
Thank you, Varun. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Gordon.
Your closing, so to speak.
Yeah,
And, Muskan.
I would just like to thank Varun as well as Gordon. I think this was extremely insightful, and the attendees had a lot to pick up from the fireside chat. I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining in. We will share the recording of the webinar, the on-demand link for you to refer to offline. And if you have any questions at all that you couldn't address in the webinar, you can just reply to us in that email or mail back Varun or Gordon, and we'll make sure to get in touch with you and address all of your queries. Thank you, Varun. Thank you, Gordon, for coming on and doing this fireside chat with us. And yeah, have a good day.
Thank you so much, Muskan.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone who joined. Thank you. Thanks, Gordon.